Today I'm going to show you guys how to figure out what time of day is best to visit any outdoor location around the world and get the best light for taking photos. So for this example, we're going to use a location in the Canadian Rockies called Smutwood Peak. It's a trail that's been gaining popularity over the past couple of years, and it's one of my favorite spots because it's a super epic location with a very distinct pointy mountain peak that you can take a photo of with a couple lakes in the front, and it's just super aesthetic. So let's jump right into it. So the first thing that I usually do when I'm trying to figure out what time is best for taking a photo is to jump into a 3D map so I can get a sense of what the terrain looks like. And in this case, I'm going to be hiking on a trail, so I'm going to use AllTrails to also visualize where the trail actually goes. So here we have the trail marked in green, and we can see that it comes all the way up to this point, number 2, called Smutwood Peak. And the iconic shot here is to shoot across to this peak called Mount Birdwood. That's the super pointy peak. And we have 2 small lakes in the front here. So now we know what direction we want to be shooting in, which is in the southeasterly direction. And we want to figure out how the light will change throughout the day. Now, generally, when I'm going out to shoot an outdoor location, 90% of the time I'm going to be shooting at either sunrise or sunset, and also the golden hour period around that, which is an hour after sunrise and the hour before sunset. So we want to be able to figure out what direction the sun will be coming in at sunrise and sunset. And for that, we can use any sort of sun tracker app. I use one called SunCalc, so let's pop into that really quick. So here in SunCalc, I've already placed our location into the search bar and set a date of August 31st during the summer. Now, if we take a look at the sunrise time, the sun is going to rise at 7 a.m. and the sun is going to set at around 8:30 p.m. And in this map, we can see that the sunrise is going to come from this northeasterly direction, and the sunset is going to come from this northwesterly direction. So if we pop back into AllTrails, we can kind of visualize this on the map itself. So if we draw these lines, we know that the sunrise is going to come from this northeasterly direction, and the sunset, the light, is going to come from this northwesterly direction. And remember that we want to be shooting in this direction. So typically I want to be shooting into the sun or having the sun come from the side because it generates a more interesting image. You get more contrast in the image versus if the sun is coming from the back. And so what this tells me is that the sunrise seems to be a better time for my preference to shoot because the light will be coming from the side versus the sunset where the light will be coming from behind us and hitting the peak in front of us. Now, the next thing that I want to consider is how the shadows will fall. Because we're operating in a mountainous area, we can expect that some of these surrounding peaks are probably going to cast some shadows into our frame, and those shadows can either help or harm our image. So how do we visualize what the shadows will look like throughout the day? Well, there's actually a pretty handy tool that we can use called Caltopo that offers a shadow overlay onto a 3D terrain map that shows you exactly where the shadows are going to be throughout the day. So if we come into Caltopo, here I've already pulled up the location that we're shooting at. Just as a reminder, we're shooting from this peak over here, and we're shooting in this direction over to this peak. And so I've already turned on the shadow overlay. Here you can turn it on by checking the sun exposure checkbox, and you can also set the date and the time that you want to visualize the shadows at. So if we come back into SunCalc, remember that our sunrise is at 7 a.m. and the sunset is at 8:30 p.m. And the thing to note about Caltopo is that this time selector that's shown here shows the time of the time zone that you're currently in, and not the time zone of the location that you're looking at on the map. So you'll have to adjust for that. So I know that I'm 1 hour behind this location. So if the sunset is at 8:30, then I will want to select 7:30 here to show the time at 8:30. And if I want to shoot at golden hour, which is an hour before the sunset, it's going to be at 6:30. So I've already set it here at 6:30, and we can visualize what the shadows look like. So here we can see that at golden hour, at sunset, our whole foreground, these lakes and this area here, is going to be completely in shadow, while the peak is going to get a little bit of light hitting the very top. But it looks like we're going to get a pretty harsh shadow cutting across the face of the peak. And that's typically something that I don't want to see. So sunset is not looking so great. Now, if we check the sunrise time, which is at 7 a.m., and so if we want to adjust for the time zone difference, then we will want to be looking at 6 a.m. And if we're looking to shoot at golden hour, which is an hour after sunrise, we'll be back at 7 a.m. So let's click that. And here we can see that at sunrise, the entirety of our frame is generally going to be lit up in sun. This whole foreground area is lit up in sun, and the north-facing face of the mountain that we're shooting is also going to be lit up in sun. So we're not going to get that kind of harsh transition between our foreground and our background, which is great. So based on the shadows, it looks like we would prefer to shoot at sunrise. And based on the sun direction, we also want to be shooting at sunrise. And that tells me that sunrise is probably the best pick for this location. So here I have a comparison of what this location looks like at sunrise and sunset from two different photographers. First, we have a sunrise photo taken by Life with Elliot, and we can see this beautiful golden glow coming from the left side of the frame, lighting up everything. And we don't have any really harsh shadows in the image, which is really nice to see. Now on the right side, as we predicted, we have this really harsh shadow cutting across our frame, and the lakes in the front are in shadow while the peak is being hit in this golden light. So some of you might actually prefer this kind of look because it might look more dramatic. My preference is to have not really any harsh shadows coming into frame. So the key takeaway here is I'm not trying to tell you which look is better. The point of this video is just to show you the tools that you can use to predict what the scene in front of you will look like at any given time of day, so you can make the judgment call for yourself based on your own preferences of what you like to see in your image and go at that time of day. So in terms of lighting, that's pretty much everything we need to consider. And the last thing that we want to think about is the weather. So if we want nice light at our location, obviously we need the sun to actually be showing. So the tool that I like to use to predict the weather is called SpotWX. And one of the main benefits of a tool like this is it allows you to place a location pin on any GPS coordinate. And this is better than your standard weather app like Google Weather or Apple Weather, because those types of apps only show you the weather at major cities and towns. And so if you're shooting at a location that's in the middle of nowhere, which if you're a landscape photographer, that can often be the case, the forecast for the closest town or city might be quite far away, and so it might be inaccurate for the location that you actually want to shoot at. So that's one major benefit. Other benefit, which we'll get to, is that it shows you much more data than your standard weather app. So here I've already gone ahead and pinpointed the location that we want to shoot at, Smutwood Peak. And if we come here below, we can see that there are a lot of different weather models that are available. And the thing to note here is that all of these models have different lengths of forecast and also different radius of the forecast around your pinpoint. And so generally, the shorter the forecast and the tighter the radius, the more accurate to your location that forecast is going to be. So if I'm getting close to the day of shooting, I'm typically wanting to check a forecast that's pretty short and pretty tight in the radius. Whereas let's say if I'm like a week out, I will use a longer forecast just because we're not close enough to use those shorter forecasts yet. So let's say that we're only 2 days out from shooting. And so I'm going to click into this HRDPS continental forecast. And here, there's a couple things that we want to take a look at. The first thing to note is up here. We can see that the model elevation is at 2,291 meters, which is super useful to know, especially for landscape photographers shooting in mountains, because as we know, as the elevation changes, the weather can change quite drastically as well. So this is one of the other differences that separates an app like this compared to a typical weather app, is it shows the weather at the elevation that you are looking at rather than at sea level. And so what might be rain much lower below could be snow at your elevation. And the other main thing that I look at is this chart here, which shows the cloud cover percentage by hour during the range of the forecast. And so if we're trying to shoot Monday sunrise, let's say, and that is at 7 a.m., we can see, if we come here, that the cloud cover is going to be 31%, which is perfect. Like, there's a high likelihood that the sun will be showing. And there's also not going to be any precipitation, which is predicted also by the fact that there's not that many clouds. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This is the exact process that I go through for any location that I'm trying to scout out and trying to figure out what time of day is the best for visiting that location. The last thing I want to note is just a general recommendation that you want to arrive earlier to your location than the time that you want to shoot at. So it gives you time to understand the lay of the land and scout out some potential compositions. So we've decided that we're going to shoot at sunrise at 7 a.m. And we also want to get there at least half an hour before. So we'll get there at around 6:30 a.m. in the morning to take a look at things. So that's pretty much it. I hope that was helpful for you. And if you want a free PDF guide that contains all of the information that we covered here in this video in a more organized fashion and goes more into detail, and also contains a step-by-step guide that you can follow every time to figure out when to get the best light at your location, you can find a link below in the description to download that free PDF guide. Cheers.